All right, now that staff has abandoned me all by myself here, we'll get rolling because it's 6:30 on a beautiful, beautiful Tuesday night. And I'm sure you guys have other places you probably want to be than learning about the open meeting law and public records. So I will go through the material as expeditiously as you let me. But you should certainly stop me when you have questions of any sort or you think anything's unclear. You don't need to save things for the end. Or if you have particular scenarios that you've been through yourselves, you can certainly jump up and ask me. I may repeat your questions through the microphone just so ActonTV can make sure everything is recorded appropriately. So we're covering two things today, both the Open Meeting Law and the Public Records Act. They are two of the primary pieces of legislation that really impact both staff and volunteer board members and committees, and they overlap in a lot of ways, and I think oftentimes get confused in some ways as well. So we're combining the training. We're going to start with the Open Meeting Law. I should start by saying, I promise to get you out of here by 8, hopefully sooner. All right, so now we're starting with the open meeting law. Now the basics of the open meeting law are that it applies to all public bodies. They must post notice of their meeting. All the meetings and the deliberations within those meetings need to be held and open to the public unless it's for an executive session, and you need to keep minutes of all your meetings, and those minutes need to be available to the public. So those are kind of like the big guideposts. But as anyone who's served on a board or committee before knows, there's really a lot more nuance and detail to actual compliance with the open meeting law than that. First is figuring out whether you are a public body. Does the open meeting law apply to you? Now, as you can see there, a public body is defined as every board, commission, committee, or subcommittee created, elected, appointed, or otherwise constituted to serve a public purpose. Where this usually gets tripped up is with subcommittees. The open meeting law is kind of governed or adjudicated by the Division of Open Government, the DOG, we call it. They're the ones who determine kind of as an initial point what the open meeting law means and any disputes about the open meeting law. And they have determined in their wisdom that not only is the board or committee a public body that has to comply with the open meeting law, but any subcommittee is also a public body that needs to comply. So an example of this would be you have a school committee, and the school committee decides we want Bobby and Sarah to go look at the English curriculum and look at whether there's any better options for the English curriculum out there. And we want Joe and Steve to go look at the science curriculum and see if there are any better science programs there. Because we all know not a lot can get done necessarily in these public sessions. You've got to do some work between the public sessions, right? Well, what happens is the school committee, by saying Bob and Susie, I always forget the names I use, Bob and Susie going to look at English, they've just created a subcommittee of Bob and Susie that are now the English curriculum subcommittee, whether they call them that or not, right? And then Steve and Jeff are the science subcommittee. And so that means that when Bob and Susie need to meet to go over the English curriculum, they need to post their meetings. They need to take minutes. It needs to be held in a public place, right? So I use this as an example because, as I said, the devil's in the details, and this is not, again, this is not, don't shoot the messenger is what I'm trying to say. This is not my decision that I think the open meeting law should apply to every constituted subcommittee of your board or committee. This is what the Attorney General's office has decided is the law. So I am just the messenger. An important caveat to that is the open meeting law does not apply to staff. So oftentimes, as we'll talk about later, we'll talk about emailing. Staff can email the whole board. Staff can email the whole board in between meetings and tell the whole board what they think about a particular topic and share their opinions and thoughts. I can email the whole board. I am an employee and staff. The open meeting law does not apply to me. I just realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Nina Pickering Cook, Town Council. Thank you, Ann. Oh, yes. Perfect. Lisa has that there. So get that out of the way. So oftentimes, ways to practically get things done in between your publicly posted meetings, staff can be really important as a facilitator in that in order to avoid getting all tripped up and creating a bunch of subcommittees that then can't meet in Susie's living room because that's not a public place. But you can still get things done. So again, a lot of the topics we'll cover tonight, some of the details can be really frustrating. My hope is that I can give you some practical tools to work within that. I'm not going to say around that, I'm going to say within that to make sure that we're all compliant. Any questions, subcommittees? Okay. So what is a meeting? These are kind of the key definitions. What's a public body? Now what's a meeting? How do you know you're in a meeting? A meeting is a deliberation of a public body with respect to any matter within its jurisdiction. Now, it's important to know when your public body has held a meeting because, as you know from the basics, you should only hold a meeting pursuant to the open meeting law when you've posted it and you're keeping minutes, et cetera. So anytime there's the public body is deliberating together, that can constitute a meeting. Now, there are exceptions. If there's a quorum of your board or committee at a public or private gathering, like a training, for instance, right now, if you had a quorum of your board attending today, that's not a meeting of your board because you're not discussing a matter within your board's jurisdiction. You're here for training. If the chair of your board invited everyone over for a summer barbecue, that is fine. You need to be incredibly judicious that you're not talking about anything within your board or committee's jurisdiction, but a social gathering is fine. For the land use boards, on-site inspections are an important exception. If you attend the meeting of another board or committee, for instance, town meeting is another one that's a big exception. The one I skipped really only applies to state boards, so that's why I'm skipping that. Now, all of these are exceptions as long as the public body does not deliberate, right? So if you're at the barbecue at someone's house and you're part of the planning board and you start talking about a new development in Kelly's Corner, you have then transferred a social gathering into a meeting of the planning board that now is being held unlawfully under the open meeting law, okay? Or the example of if you attend the meeting of another public body. So oftentimes, particularly when you're getting to town meeting time, the Board of Selectmen are reviewing articles, a quorum of your board wants to go and discuss those articles. They don't need to post that as a meeting, for instance, of the planning board, as long as they don't deliberate in public. So what happens or what gets people tripped up is if the planning board is going to present in front of the Board of Selectmen and say, here are our zoning articles, here is what we think, here are our recommendations and why we think this should actually pass. At that point, they're very clearly deliberating as their own independent public body within the select board's meeting. So they should just post it as two meetings. The planning board should post a meeting, the Board of Selectmen should post a meeting. If, however, members of the select board want to attend a planning board meeting just about a large new development in Kelly's Corner, everything I say tonight is usually hypothetical, so I don't know of any development at Kelly's Corner, just so people don't leave here and start talking. It's made up. So there's a big new development in Kelly's Corner. Many members of the select board want to go because they want to hear the presentation. As long as that quorum does not deliberate or disclose their public views on this matter, or as long as it's not within their jurisdiction at all, for instance, for site plan, they can go and attend the planning board meeting without posting it as a select board meeting. They can ask questions. The Attorney General starts getting a little squirmy when people start asking questions. So I'll give you an example with the on-site inspection. This one always trips people up. So when the open meeting law in this kind of generation came about and all of these new changes were made, we were really excited about the on-site inspection because it's really difficult to schedule a public meeting for 10:30 to walk through 32 Main Street, and it can just take minutes. It's really cumbersome, right? So we said, great, on-site inspections are not going to be part of it. And what the Attorney General over the years has determined through the Division of Open Government is that essentially you can have a quorum attend an on-site inspection, but you essentially can't talk. So what we've pushed back on the Attorney General and said, they don't need to deliberate at the site walk, but they need to be able to ask questions. Is the house going to go to this line or this line? About how tall are we talking about? Is that tree going to stay or is that tree going to be cut down? The kinds of things you would ask during a site walk. The Attorney General has determined that if a quorum of the board is there and you have a member that's asking these questions, it can very quickly slip into deliberations. It can very quickly slip into making it very clear what a board member thinks about a certain presentation, right? You're walking through and it's going to be, wow, 4 stories. Okay. Well, that's a lot bigger than what's here now. And all these trees are going to go? Okay. It's very obvious then to his or her other board members, she's not in favor of this project, right? So the Attorney General has said, you can all attend site visits, but, essentially no talking. So really we've just reverted to the old way of doing things, which is we do 2 different site visits, so a quorum of the board is never there. Because the whole purpose of site visits is so people can ask questions. Where is it going? Visually, how can I picture this? There's going to be factual questions when you're at the site. So unless you have a very diligent board and a very judicious board, the safest bet is to do a site walk without a quorum present. Yeah. Sure. So the question was, in the previous slide when we were talking about the constitution of public bodies, one of the notes was even a subcommittee of 2 or more people can constitute a public body, and now I'm talking about a quorum. Isn't that inconsistent? And it's not, and I'll tell you why. So a quorum typically, and it can vary, so you should always check with your board or committee with town manager's office if you're not sure. Typically, a quorum is going to be a majority of your board. There can be questions at the margins of if we have a vacancy, is it a majority of the board as constituted, or is it a majority of the board as legislatively established? Those can be two different things. So if you have vacancies on your board and you're not sure about your quorum requirements, you should ask. Typically, it's a majority of the board. The reason I say that the subcommittee is any two or more people is when a subcommittee is created, the Attorney General has determined that's a whole new public body, right? So, but the only way around that is you can't have a subcommittee of one. So in my previous example of the school curriculum, if instead of telling Bobby and Susie to do the English curriculum, we just told Bobby, and he can work with staff on it, that's not a subcommittee, because you can't have a subcommittee of one. So the two or more is just to make clear, once you have two people, then it's a subcommittee. Does that make sense? Okay. Anything else on meeting? The problem is it's, so let's ask if a developer or an applicant is there, can the board answer questions of the applicant? Typically, it's the other way around, right? Typically, it's the applicant that has the information about the project that's informing the board. Again, I think staff asking questions, staff answering questions, totally fine. The board members themselves, if there's more than a quorum there, I would try to remain as quiet as possible. Again, a lot of the theme of tonight you will hear for open meeting law stuff is use staff where possible. You know, if all the board members have a bunch of questions for the site visit, give them to staff ahead of time. Staff won't disclose what member those questions arise from. And then you're not kind of infecting the rest of the board with anyone's opinions about things not in a public meeting. Yeah.
For your board is 3, how can 2 become a problem?
So the question was, if a quorum of your board is 3, how can 2 be a problem? I didn't say they would be a problem. I said they'd be a subcommittee. So if you have a 4 or 5 member board, so 5-member board typically, 3 is a quorum. But if your board decides that it's going to create a subcommittee of 2 people, it's not a problem. They just, those 2 people as its own public body, you all probably didn't know you had the ability to create a new public body, but you do. If you create a subcommittee, you've created a new public body that needs to comply with the open meeting law. So it's not that 2 is a problem. It's only if they've created, if you've given them a task to go away and do, they need to comply with the open meeting law, those 2 people.
Well, if 2 of my board members go into an on-site situation, could they not ask questions?
They can ask questions. They're not a subcommittee. So people are confusing the subcommittee and the quorum. Subcommittee is only if you designate, think of the curriculum example. I'm designating you 2 people to go off and deal with this issue and come and report back to the board. You've created a subcommittee. But if this is, you know, our board has a site visit on Tuesday and 2 people show up of the 5, those 2 people can talk about the project they want. And then they can call each other afterwards and talk about the project. Because 2 of a 5-member board is not a quorum. So it's not a meeting. That's why we went through those. We're doing it in the fashion of going through the definitions first. It's you need to know the definition of a meeting in order to know whether you need to comply with the open meeting law. For a meeting, you need a quorum. Fran?
So say the select board was attending a committee and there was a quorum. Can they discuss what's on the agenda of that meeting?
So Fran asked if the select board goes to the meeting of another board and there's 3 of them there, which would be a quorum of the select board, can they discuss the agenda item for that board? You can in 2 situations. If it is within your jurisdiction as a board of selectmen, or as a select board at this point, you need to post that as a meeting of the select board. So an example would be if you go to the planning board or the zoning board for a matter that's also going to come to you for site plan review, you 3 cannot talk about that agenda item without posting it as a meeting of the select board as well, because that's within your jurisdiction. If, however, you're going to a meeting of, trying to think of something that's like really not in your jurisdiction, tennis courts that the recreation department is doing and you have no involvement in that, and you and Alyssa and Jim want to talk about how you're so excited about new tennis courts being built, that's fine, because that's not something that's going to be coming in front of you guys. But given that the select board purview is fairly wide in Acton, you've got to be careful about it. All right, so after meeting, we need to know what the definition of deliberate is. So I'm not going to make you read that because it looks exceedingly small when you put it on a big screen up here. The main takeaway is deliberation. You guys have these slides. You guys have these slides to take home, so you can read the definition. What I'm going to tell you is how I think of deliberation when people ask me questions. How I think of deliberation is, did I learn someone's opinion about something during the course of communication amongst a quorum of the public body, right? So and that means in any form. And now obviously in red, we have email or other electronic media, because that's the one that trips people up the most. So you can only, as public board members, you can only deliberate in a public meeting. You can only, unless you have an executive session, which we'll talk about. But you can only make your opinion known about a matter within your jurisdiction if you're at a duly posted public meeting. So with a quorum. That means if Alyssa and Fran, who are both on the select board, but are just 2 members, want to talk to each other about any matter within their purview about, the budget, they can email each other, they can call each other, they can talk to each other all they want. It cannot extend beyond the 2 of them. So Fran cannot say, you know what, I really want to know what Dean thinks about this. Let's loop him in. Or I'm going to forward Alyssa's email to Dean and say, hey, Dean, what do you think about this? Because as soon as it hits that 3rd member, either electronically or by voice, or you run into each other in the hallway, then it becomes a deliberation amongst a quorum. So essentially, if you're a 5-member board, you can know one other member's viewpoint on any matter outside of a meeting, but you can't know 2. And once you know 2, something has gone wrong. Yeah.
So let's say Alyssa and Fran discuss an opinion with each other,
Yep.
and Alyssa talked to somebody else on the board about the same issue. Yeah.
Nope, because then 3 people on the board all know how Alyssa feels about it. So even if it's not in one conversation, Alyssa can't, and you're just becoming the guinea pig for this. Alyssa can't go to Fran and then to Dean and then to Jim. So now she's lined up all of her ducks before you get to an open meeting, and no member of the public has been able to hear that discussion.
Does anything change once the issue has been discussed among the board members in a public meeting?
So
Or say voted on, does anything change that OML whereby they could give an opinion on something that's overdone?
I would say if you are confident that it is not coming before you again, fine. Right, but things always come back. So I would be very, very careful about doing that. Obviously, if you're talking about things that have happened in the past in a public meeting. Alyssa, you got really excited about this vote before, I was kind of curious about that. Why were you so exercised about it? And you're talking about the meeting 2 weeks ago, and then in another year and a half, the matter comes up. I'm not going to have heartburn about that conversation you had, like an after-the-fact debrief that you had 2 years before. But certainly if you're in the middle of the matter, you have a site plan review in front of you, and you have 3 nights of hearings, and after the first night, you make it known what your position is. And Jim says he's for it and you're against it. You certainly can't talk just because that one meeting is over if that matter has not been resolved in front of you. There are things you can do outside of meetings with your board or committee, but they're very few and far between, and they fall into the category of just administrative. So if you want to talk about the who, when, where, what of meetings, you can do that on email. We're meeting on Tuesday night this week instead of Wednesday night. I wanted to let everyone know. That's fine. Here's the agenda for next week's meeting and all the documents you're going to need. That's fine. But what's not fine is, here's the agenda for next week and the application from the applicant for the development in Kelly's Corner. It's a really well-done report, so I encourage you all to read it very carefully, right? At that point, whoever sent that, if that is sent by a board member, whoever sent that out has now expressed their opinion about it. So just send the documents and receive documents and don't comment beyond that if you're a board member. Again, we're going to talk about ways to work around this with staff. So that's this slide. So trying to share information outside of public meetings. There's a case called the Bolter case that gets cited now because it came up with this thing called the Bolter rule. And it came out of Wayland. And I think it was a review of the town manager's contracts and the evaluations of his contract. And what happened is the Board of Selectmen had each filled out evaluations for the town manager, as boards do. And instead of sending them to staff, which would be the normal course, which would be the town manager, because they're about the town manager, everyone sent their evaluations back to the chair. And the chair kind of compressed all of those evaluations into one cohesive document evaluation and then sent it back out to the members. And the SJC said, no, you can't do that outside of a meeting. What you've done at that point is you've both received the opinions and thoughts of all these other board members and then shared them again with the other ones outside of a public meeting. And now everyone can see what Fran's evaluation was and what Alyssa's evaluation was. Everyone, meaning everyone on the board, can see that outside of a public meeting. So what the SJC said is that's only okay if you distribute those same documents to the public at the same time. So this comes up, and that's what we call the Bolter rule. This comes up a lot with distributing documents. So these are things to remember, and again, these are things that can trip up both staff. I know there's some staff here, so both staff and board members. So if you want to distribute documents with your board or committee, here is what I would recommend. Use staff. So again, staff can always receive your opinions. For instance, most of the time you're circulating minutes. That's what every board or committee needs to maintain, minutes. So oftentimes those are the documents you're distributing. Minutes and changes to minutes, believe it or not, can often be very substantive. And so say there's a select board minutes about the Kelly's Corner development, and Lisa sends out to the board, here are the minutes from last week, let me know if you have any comments. Fran should not reply to the whole group and say, I didn't say that about the Kelly's Corner development. I said this. You know, and I want to make sure the minutes clearly reflect that I said X instead of Y. She can use staff. She can communicate that to staff directly. She just can't communicate that to the rest of the public body. If you don't have staff, not all boards and committees have staff. What the Bolter rule says is, as long as you make your each member's opinion or subjective viewpoint about a matter available to the public contemporaneously when you provide it to the rest of the board, that's fine. So if you have, the HDC has staff now, but for years the HDC didn't have staff, right? And so if the HDC wanted to exchange notes about to correct their minutes outside of a meeting, either we would say, hold that for a meeting and just do it as your first agenda item at the meeting, or if you have to do it outside of a meeting, you're gonna have to just post everyone's comments on the HDC website as they come in, which can be cumbersome, but that's one way to do it. Again, beware of email. So circulating drafts through email or through Google Docs. Again, if you're making substantive changes on things, that's deliberation according to the Attorney General. So that's going to be, you know, Google Docs, all of these things, all of this technology is like so wonderful to use in our private lives and so useful in our private lives. But the second you get to your public duties, that is not the priority anymore. Being efficient, it is being transparent, that is in complying with the law. That's of utmost priority. So the feedback and edits involving multiple board members need to happen in public, or the staff can compile them. And less than a quorum can still communicate outside of a meeting. That was the Fran and Melissa example. But we tend to say avoid email for this purpose. Not only are all of those communications, of course, subject to public records requests, but more importantly, it is just too easy when you're using email to run afoul of the open meeting law. Because what happens is it gets forwarded to someone either intentionally or unintentionally, and then you've spread the web of deliberation farther than you intended to do.
I'd like you to go through how you evaluate those, say, the library director without involving the library director.
Okay. So what did Bolter do wrong, essentially? What did Wayland do wrong in the Bolter case? Which was, so the question Ann had was, how do you go about evaluating staff without involving staff? Where they went wrong is you can each fill out your evaluations. Each member of the trustees will fill out their evaluations. Submit them all to the chair or any other designated, whoever you're going to appoint as the member who's going to compile them. That member then can compile them and create a document, but they hold that document until the next meeting and then shares it with everyone. Or if he or she wants to share it with people before the meeting, they have to also make it available to the public. So opinions can come in to one person. They cannot go back out to everyone.
So let's posit the fact that all the opinions come in to me.
Yep.
All the trustees.
So all the evaluations go to Ann.
Okay, I make a compilation.
Ann makes a compilation.
Then we have a meeting without staff, a public meeting without staff. And I don't have to send anything out to the public because we're going to discuss something that's personnel.
Correct. I mean, you never, as long as you hold it for the meeting, you never need to send it out to the public.
But it's not, it would not be a regular board of trustees meeting, this would be a board of trustees meeting talking about the evaluation of the director.
So oftentimes what's going to happen is those, in evaluations, I'm glad you're stopping on this because this is actually something that trips up almost every town I know. If you're using the evaluations, for instance, to negotiate or figure out the town's negotiating position with respect to the library director's contract, then you can hold that discussion in executive session. If you are just doing an annual review for her, to determine her professional competence, that needs to be held in open session. And certainly, you can ask staff not to be there, but you can't do that behind closed doors. Contract negotiations behind closed doors, fine, as we'll talk about. Professional evaluations of competence need to be held in a public session. So if you're, I'm sorry? There's not, so I'm going to hold you off for just a second. There's not an executive session purpose just to discuss personnel. If there has been a complaint, or if you're discussing someone's a medical or other private situation, which triggers one of the purposes, you can hold that in executive session. You cannot go into executive session just to do an annual evaluation, unless that is tied to contract negotiations. Yeah, certainly. So say there was a select board meeting tonight. They get a public packet beforehand. Oftentimes, the public is made aware of that packet and it's available online. But that's not always the case. Certainly, the HGC staff member may send the board, here are all the applications that are up for this week's meeting. And he or she, that member of the HGC and the staff, is not emailing that out to the general public. That's fine.
This is, I'm having a problem understanding the openness of open meetings. If doesn't it have to be that every committee sees the meeting, unless it's an executive session, has to be available to the public in an open meeting?
This is where you're confusing public records and open meeting. Those documents are available to the public, meaning the public can request them. But if, for instance, I came in and was presenting to the select board tonight and I brought them 5 copies of my presentation and I didn't bring any for the 30 people here in the audience, there's nothing wrong with that. The select board can go ahead and do the presentation and review the materials. And if you want to get a copy of the materials afterwards, you email the select board office in the morning and say, can I have a copy of the materials that were distributed last night? That's fine. Eventually, probably. But you could certainly ask for them. They're certainly public records. But it is not the case that the open meeting law requires you all to have copies of everything that these folks have in front of them.
But it has to be available.
Nope.
At some point.
You can request it.
Oh, it has to be available, that's what I mean.
It
Ask for it, they have to be provided that.
absolutely. It does not have to be available, meaning the HGC does not need to publish all of their documents they review for every single meeting. They're available upon request. But there's a difference between being available upon request and having to provide them at the meeting, is I thought what you were getting at.
No, that's not what I meant. I mean, if it's available to if it's not an executive session, if it's available to the people in the meeting, the committee members and so forth, it has to be ultimately available to anyone in the public.
100%. I'm sorry if I confused you on that one. I thought we meant just at the meeting itself. So now we figure, yeah.
So I'm trying to cover this, but frequently you manage to, and then prior to the next meeting, part of the agenda.
Yep, standard practice. What he's saying is oftentimes we'll do minutes during the meeting, and then between and before the next meeting, they'll send out those minutes as, part of the agenda for the public body to review before the next meeting.
So if there are opinions memorialized in those minutes, Tom thinks something is great, but can't.
Great question.
Isn't that a deliberation? Is that what you can't say about it?
No, because where has that deliberation taken place? It took place in a public meeting. It's just a memorialization of what happened at that public meeting. Now, if you sent out those minutes that said, Tom thinks this is the best project in the world, and Tom emails the board back, again, in your public life, just never hit reply all. That would save a lot of town council money. If just no one, every time you think of hitting reply all, I want a little town council to come on your shoulder and be like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to reply all? Because you probably don't. So what would happen is if you sent it out and then Tom wrote back to the whole group, before the next meeting and said, that's not what I said. I didn't think this was a great project. I think this is crap and it's going to ruin Kelly's Corner. Then Tom has now violated the open meeting law. The person who sent the minutes didn't. But Tom, by responding, has shared an opinion outside of a public meeting. He can say that in a public meeting. So when you get to your next meeting and Tom says, hey, buddy, that's not what I said during the meeting. I want you to change the minutes. You can have that discussion. You have that discussion in public, and that's fine, and you figure out what to do with the minutes. But that communication can't go on an email. But great question.
So I have a question about the approval of these edited minutes. If I say, that's not what I said, could you change this phrase to this? And the clerk says, yep, I agree with that, I'll change it. Then that edited document is not circulated among the board, and yet it's voted on in consent at the meeting. So my question is twofold. What happens if I change something that's not a typo or grammar, it's substantive, and another board member changes it? We send that message individually to the clerk, that's a quorum now, and then all 5 board members are voting on.
No.
I think I'm voting on the minutes that have my edit, the other board member knows about his edit, the clerk knows about both, and the other 2 board members are voting on the original unedited minutes.
Yeah, so Alyssa's question is what happens if essentially 2 people have either the same or competing edits to make to the minutes? And as most of you know, the approval of minutes is just kind of a perfunctory vote at the beginning of the meeting. How do people know what they're voting on? So the answer is the board has to know what they're voting on, 100%. So you can provide edits to that, your clerk or your staff member. Anyone can. What the staff member should do is that they then provide an edited version of the minutes that says, paren or brackets, changes requested by Alyssa, changes requested by Fran. And that is the document that people vote on, and you're gonna need to discuss it. So staff doesn't necessarily make the call as far as, yes, that's right, I'm going to change that. The board should be made aware that changes were made from the initial draft, changes were requested, and that should be discussed as part of that minute approval process. And so if you're not aware of that happening, or if you think changes are just getting slid in, they should be discussed. Certainly if they're substantive. If it's, you had a run-on sentence or it's clearly a typo, I'm not going to lose sleep over that, but anything substantive should be discussed.
So the staff can change the minutes if the staff has taken the minutes, but if a clerk has taken the minutes, it should be the clerk that makes those changes, or the staff also?
No, staff can, whoever has generally the responsibility for taking the minutes can make changes. If technically on some boards, it's going to be a clerk because they don't have staff, that's fine. That person is responsible for them. If they're sick that week and he asks Dave to do it, then Dave does the minutes that week. But if you have staff, that is a good use of a staff resources to compile any of those changes and put together a new draft for folks to vote on. Or you save your changes for the meeting, right? When you get to the point of approval of last week's minutes, you say, great, I just have a couple of changes on page 3. It says this, can you change that? And then you can still have the vote that night. You vote on them as amended by the board at that meeting. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'm sorry, so can a staff person that isn't responsible for the minutes just change the minutes before they're sent out?
If a board or committee, so she's asking if a staff person who isn't responsible for taking the minutes change them before they go out. If the board as an entity wants to delegate that authority to a staff person, then they can do that. If the board has not delegated that authority to the staff person shouldn't be changing the minutes.
Then what happens if that happens?
Then someone should talk to the staff person or the staff person's supervisor. Staff is not subject to the open meeting law, so it wouldn't be an open meeting law violation for them. But clearly it's unprofessional conduct, so someone should talk to them. So we're getting to minutes. You guys are great because you've already asked the hard questions for later slides, so we can breeze through these. So now we figured out you're a public body, you want to deliberate, you want to do it in a proper meeting. What rules do you need to follow? You need to notice your meeting and post your meeting. And this used to trip folks up a lot. It's much easier these days because you have a clerk's office, and I'll point out Leo who can wave. You have a clerk's office who is very adept and skilled at doing this. They know what your agendas need to contain. They know when you need to post it, and they'll tell you if you're doing anything wrong. So the general rules are 48 hours ahead, but that excludes, you need to post it on the website that Town of Acton has approved. It used to be they had to be physically posted at Town Hall. Now it can be on the website, but that excludes Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. So 48 hours ahead, if you meet on a Monday night, is Thursday, just so people know. So if you meet Monday at 5, your deadline for posting your meeting is Thursday at 5. Always be aware, because the town clerk is responsible in kind of the central body for posting a meeting, know what town clerk's office hours are. Don't email town clerk Thursday at 8 p.m. and say, I emailed them on Thursday, I don't know why they didn't post it. Well, they didn't post it because the clerk's office closes at 5 on Thursday, so they're not gonna get it after hours. The required content is date, time, place, time and place that the notice itself was posted. Don't worry about that. The town clerk's office does that for you. And then the topics. In most boards, as I said, the topics the chair reasonably anticipates. Most boards post their agenda here. That's just part of what the meeting posting is these days. If you're a new board or committee or a new chair, we have templates for meeting notices and meeting postings. The town clerk's office has all of those forms. This is not something you need to figure out what it should look like. We have like a fill in the blank. When it talks about the things that the chair reasonably anticipates. This was something that used to trip folks up quite a bit. Your agenda item needs to be reasonably specific so that the public knows what issues are going to be discussed. So if the Board of Selectmen are talking about the new Kelly's Corner development, I would want to see an agenda item that says, new proposed development at Kelly's Corner, lists the address, being proposed by Acton Development Company, LLC, and then because all of these things are electronic, hopefully there's a link to, the application materials. I do not want to see an agenda item that says proposed development in Acton. Like no one, I don't know, is that my neighbor? Is that Kelly's Corner? I have no idea, right? So someone from the public has to be able to look at your agenda and say like, oh, is that something I would be interested in? Would I want to go to that meeting? Yes or no? There needs to be enough to know that like, if this is something that's happening on that person's street, that they can be able to tell that from the agenda item so that they can attend. Now, what happens if, for instance, the select board takes public comment? So you have someone that comes up and raises an issue and wants a response from the select board during public comment, and it's not something that's on the agenda. There's a couple of different responses. If it's a small matter of, I'm here because I live on Pearl Street and our trash has not been picked up for 3 weeks. And I'm pissed and I want the select board to do something about it. And I want a response. The chair and the board can consider that and say, gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that. We're gonna follow up with our DPW director. Give us your phone number and we'll be in touch with you tomorrow. It wasn't on the agenda. The chair didn't anticipate that someone was going to come and yell at them about the garbage collection. But they can consider that. They don't need to say, you're going to have to get an appointment on the agenda and come back 2 weeks from now after garbage has collected for another 2 weeks and complain to us then. No, you can have that brief discussion. If, however, someone comes to the board and says, I've got to meet with the board. I really want to meet to discuss, the school committee's budget. Well, that's something is going to be a topic of discussion for the town. People are going to be very interested in it. Say you're cutting 25 teachers and people are up in arms. It's an issue of important public debate. What I would say at that point is certainly if someone has public comment during the public comment period, you can take that. But if someone wants to raise it as an agenda item, you say, you know what, this is a big issue. I want to make sure people have proper notice of this. I'm not going to add it to the agenda without it being on the public meeting notice because we really want to make sure people have adequate notice because this is a big topic and we know this is going to be controversial. So it's one of those things that's kind of a judgment call. If you know it's a big issue that people are going to be interested in, make the person wait till you can properly post it. If it's a smaller matter that can be resolved in the course of a meeting and you didn't anticipate that it was going to come up, it's not on your agenda, you can make a judgment call to deal with it. Again, if you didn't reasonably anticipate it and it's of limited kind of public significance. So that's notice and posting. What happens when you're at a meeting? Now we couldn't resist, our municipal law group couldn't resist using lots of these slides from Parks and Recreation. I don't know if anyone watched Parks and Recreation, but it's about local government. And especially these days, things can be very contentious in public meetings. So how public meetings are run is an area of a lot of interest, an area of significant case law recently, and something that, although it is not necessarily spelled out in the open meeting law, is certainly worth training. So the little blurb says, what I hear when I'm being yelled at by people is people caring loudly about me. So her placid demeanor there is, I want you to remember that if someone is standing in front of your board telling you you're all incompetent and they can't believe you have, the taxpayers have elected you to this position, I kind of want you to sit there like that, right? And just think, this person cares so loudly about me. Because certainly in this day and age, people have a lot of opinions about local government. People are more involved than ever, which is a good thing. But people have a lot of opinions, and so you're gonna not necessarily have people agreeing with you all the time. And if you're in the position of being a member of a board or committee, there's an extent to which you kind of got to sit and take it. And it stinks to give that advice, but that's kind of the advice at this point, all right? So the best practices, and again, these are our best practices for how the chair operates as a chair and how they run their meeting. So typically the chair does the scheduling of the meeting and presides over the meeting. They set the agenda and make sure it's posted. And then they ensure compliance with the open meeting law. In parentheses there, it says including informing of recording and any special regulations for the pandemic. What I mean by recording is also now everyone has a camera in their pocket, right? So oftentimes you'll have people that want to record your meeting. Everyone has a right to record the meeting. The only thing, they need to tell the chair ahead of time, and the chair needs to make sure everyone in the room knows that they're being recorded. So it's not fair and it's not legal to record someone without them knowing it. So you need to make sure that everyone's aware this person is filming the meeting. If any particular person doesn't want to be filmed, they certainly can say, I'd rather you not film me, if you would. But they do have the right to film the public meeting. The rules for moderating public participation, and this is probably the biggest change since last year, although it's not really a change for Acton, because this is the way Acton has conducted itself, certainly at the select board level. But the chair can designate a time for public comment. You can set time limits for public comment. You can prohibit people from speaking over each other. But many of you may have heard of this Barron case from the SJC in the last year, which essentially says what we've all known to be true, which is you can't control what someone says, right? So if someone wants to get up and yell at Fran and Alyssa for being the worst select board members in the world, whoever the chair is can't say, that's rude and inappropriate, sit down. We're not gonna hear you say that. Barron has said, look, being as a public official, you're going to hear people disagree with you and even call you names, and that's okay, and that's part of their First Amendment rights. Again, what we can do is we can say you can't interrupt a meeting. Someone can't get up in the middle of the meeting and start screaming at you and tell you you're the worst select person. Nope, you're disrupting the meeting. The chair can ask you to be quiet. If they're not being quiet, the chair can ask you to leave. If that person doesn't leave, they can ask a police officer to escort the person out. That's fine. The Barron decision doesn't touch the ability of the chair to kind of control the meeting. But if someone has 2 minutes to get up and they have 2 minutes during public comment and they want to tell you how corrupt they believe your board is, they can do that. They have the right to do that, and we're just going to sit and listen to them do that. What they're not allowed to do is incite violence or use fighting words. If someone's getting really exercised and says, I'm gonna get you, Fran, when you leave this meeting, no, that's threats, that's violence, no. If someone's talking about your professional competence, that's one thing. If they go overboard and become threatening, that's not allowed. So I think some of the thought around the Barron decision is people can get up and say whatever they want now. That's not true. We can ask people to be civil. We can ask people to be polite. If they want to be rude and uncivil, they have the right to do that. But they certainly don't have the right to threaten or otherwise degrade or slander anyone. So that's still, again, it made a lot of news, but it doesn't actually change the way things have been operating in Acton, as far as I'm aware, at least. The open meeting law does not, however, mean that you have to hear from the public. So a lot of boards and committees, the select board has a public comment period. The HDC, for instance, probably doesn't. They'll have public comment if there's a public hearing in front of them, but they may not generally just have a public comment period during their meeting. So they could hold a whole meeting and have the public there and a member of the public being like, I want to be heard on this. And if it's not a public hearing, they don't necessarily have a right to speak. So a public open meeting means you get to see and watch how government happens. Open meeting law does not mean you get to participate in government happening. Okay, so that's usually, people say, this is an open meeting, I get to comment. It's like, nope, the open meeting law is actually completely silent on whether public is allowed to participate or not. It says nothing about participation. It says you get to watch it happen. That being said, it's usually a good idea if the public has gone through the trouble of going to your meeting to take their comments, but there may be reasons you're not, or maybe late, or you maybe want to do it at another time, but typically you should try. So as we know, it used to be remote participation had a lot of rules around it. And then the pandemic happened, and now it's like open season for remote participation. So you can hold meetings in person, you can hold meetings remotely, and you can hold meetings hybrid if your select board has allowed boards and committees to do that. All of that is allowed at this point through March 31st, 2025. A lot of municipal lawyers are working on codifying the pandemic rules into permanent authorization for remote or hybrid participation. At this point, the best we've done is just to extend it to 2025 to give people time to write that legislation. But that's, for right now, you can participate remotely. A couple of specific rules during remote participation, all if it's hybrid, so hybrid or remote. All votes must be by roll call, so that means you need to write down every member's vote in the minutes. So no votes are 4-1. Votes are Joe, Bob, Sue, and Jan, I, Nina, nay. All your minutes have to say exactly how everyone voted for every single vote, whether it's to enter the meeting, whether it's to adjourn the meeting, or whether it's a substantive vote about a matter in front of you. It's all roll call. All the steps for executive session, which we'll talk about in a minute, need to be followed. Plus, whoever is remotely participating for the executive session has to declare that no one else is with them in the room. And then oftentimes what people will say is, oh, we were participating, we had a hybrid meeting and all the select board was here, but then the video feed went out. What do we do? And if it's a hybrid meeting, the best practice is really to pause, try to triage and fix things to the extent you can. And then if you have, again, if you have a remote or a hybrid meeting and you're having technical problems that you can't recover from, adjourn the meeting and hold it another time.
If you've got the minutes, can you say that it was unanimous, the vote was unanimous, or do you have to say every?
So the question is, if you're in a remote or a hybrid meeting and there's a unanimous vote, can you just say unanimous, or do you have to write the names of everyone down? I would say, being practical, as long as you have the attendance clearly listed, then you can say unanimous. But you've got to be able to know what unanimous means. If there's 3 people there and 2 people are absent, we don't know which 3 people voted for the thing. So there's got to be the attendance list too, which should be in there anyways. So what needs to be in the minutes? Date, time, place, members present, a summary of discussions. Now, I will tell you, you will, if you get into a practice of making your minutes be a transcript of what happened at the meeting, you will never get your minutes done, right? And I am much more concerned about making sure that people get their minutes timely done and approved than I am about having a word-for-word recording of what happened. So minutes shouldn't be a transcript. Minutes should be a summary of discussions. So what do I mean by that? Board of Selectmen discussed the site plan for the new development in Kelly's Corner. The discussion was roughly 30 minutes long. During that discussion, Fran raised concerns with the traffic patterns. Staff described the traffic patterns as being up to code and being reviewed by experts. Alyssa had concerns about, the water runoff. We discussed that. It does not need to be Alyssa said X, Y, and Z, and then Alyssa asked X, Y, and Z. You want to have it be in more of a summary form, again, or you're just never going to get your minutes done. Again, the touchstone I always use for thinking about when people ask me how detailed do my minutes need to be. They need to be of sufficient detail that if I didn't attend the meeting, I can tell what happened and why they made that decision. So for instance, if I don't attend the meeting where the select board is reviewing the site plan for Kelly's Corner, and they end up voting, 0 to 5 against the site plan, your minutes need to be of sufficient detail that I can read the minutes and understand why the select board voted it down. So it can't be, board discussed the site plan, got to a vote, they voted 5-0 against the site plan. Well, it tells me nothing. I have no idea what their concerns were. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know why they voted it down. So there needs to be enough detail that you can tell why something happened. Again, obviously a record of all votes, the actions that the board took should be in there, and a list of documents used. So this goes back to the question we had earlier tonight about whether documents need to be part of the open meeting law, whether they need to be made available. Your minutes should have a list of all the documents that your board or committee looked at. All the ones they touched, they got on email, they discussed at the meeting, they should be listed. They do not need to be attached to the minutes, but they need to be listed in the minutes. Again, you don't need to create your own form of minutes. We have a minutes template that the town clerk has. You can email Leo and say, I want to see town council's template for minutes, and it will have at the top, members present, members absent, agenda item, discussion, vote, documents used. It'll give you all the prompts of the stuff that you need to have in your minutes to try to make it as easy as possible. Then you get to, what do you do if you want to hold an executive session? Yeah.
In the minutes, and you have a public meeting, you have some of the members are on hybrid,
Yep.
and you have an audience, and then you have an audience on hybrid.
Yep.
You have to make a distinction between all of those?
I would make a distinction between the members that are remote and the members that are present. It doesn't matter. You don't need to list who is there from the public. But I think you should say, these 5 members participate remotely, these 5 members were in the room. Executive session is another area that is exceedingly technical and kind of very formulaic, and it trips people up all the time, and the Attorney General requires very specific compliance with it. So for executive session, you can never just hold an executive session in and of itself. You have to always first convene an open session. That means your agenda for any executive session should be agenda item number 1, open public session to enter executive session. Agenda item number 2, executive session, and then your agenda items for the executive session. So you always convene the open session, and then in that open session, vote to go into executive session, and only then do you close the doors and turn off the webcasting. Now, your chair must publicly state the purpose for the executive session and all the subjects that will be discussed. Again, this needs to be as specific as you can be without violating the purpose for the executive session. So for instance, if we're negotiating the town manager's contract, you say, negotiations for the town manager's contract through 2026. You don't need to say necessarily, negotiating a 10% raise of the town manager's contract through 2026. You have to take a roll call vote to enter. You still need to maintain minutes. There used to be this, the kind of old school thought of executive session was like, as soon as the door closed in executive session, like everyone drops their pencils and now it's like off the record. That is not what happens. You need to still take the same level of specificity for your minutes. You just have them in a separate document. And once you're in executive session, you need to be very judicious about policing yourself, about discussing only the matter that is on the agenda. Now, what can you discuss in executive session? Literally, these 10 things are the only things you can discuss in executive session and nothing else. And you need to identify on your agenda item, and again, the town clerk's office can help you with this. You need to identify which purpose you're going into executive session for. So it can be number 1, to discuss a reputation, character, health, discipline, complaints of an individual. So that could be, usually it's an employee, it could be some other individual, if there's some other individual that's causing an issue for your board or committee. Again, if you're listing that agenda item topic, you generally want to include counsel in this, but you want to be very careful that you're not ruining the purpose for executive session by giving too much in your agenda item. An example would be, terrible example would be, discuss allegations of child abuse against town council. It's like, oh, well, now everyone in the town thinks that I'm a child abuser, because you put that in the agenda item. It's, no, discuss a complaint against town council. Discuss a complaint of, DPW employee without naming that employee. At least at this level. Once it comes to a point of actual discipline or some actions being taken, then those will likely take place in a public session. But when you're just discussing the initial matter under purpose 1, you need to be very careful. Strategy sessions with negotiations with non-union personnel. Again, this is if you're evaluating the library director, if you're evaluating and negotiating the town manager's contract, those contract negotiations can be in executive session. Number 3, discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation. Oftentimes, this is where town council comes in. I'll come and meet with either the zoning board or the select board to discuss litigation. Now, the ones in red are all, go with the asterisks at the bottom. You can only discuss those things if you can declare that holding an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on whatever you're going to discuss. So for instance, if I want to meet with the select board because I've settled litigation and I want to describe that to them, that can't be an executive session. That's got to be an open session. It's settled, it's done. I'm not asking them for anything, I'm just disclosing the fact. Me disclosing it to the public will not change the negotiating position of the board. If the case is not settled yet, and I'm going to the board and saying, I think we really got to settle this one, I think we need to, use insurance money for this or do whatever, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly where we're gonna land, then having those discussions in open session is gonna kill my bargaining power with the other side, right? So I can do that in executive session. But if it's reporting on things that are already done and dusted, that's gotta be an open session. Security personnel and devices, again, if we're talking, about a evacuation plan or something of the schools, and we want to talk about that in executive session with the school committee, that's perfectly appropriate. Any allegations of criminal misconduct? Acquisitions of real property. Again, this is a little broader than just acquisitions. It's usually the acquisitions or discussion of the value of real property. So again, if we're discussing the value of the acquisition of a real property interest, we can do that. If we're talking about property we've already bought, that's got to be an open session. You can't just go to executive session because you're talking about property. Compliance with law or grant and aid requirements that say this has to be an executive session. Preliminary screening for employment. So again, many, if we're hiring a new town manager, there'll be a screening committee and a screening process. A lot of those candidates don't want to make their candidacy public because obviously if they don't make it through the screening process, their employer now knows they've applied to a position in another town. So screening processes for employment can usually be done confidentially until the final round. The final round needs to be done in public. If you want to confer with a mediator, so if I want to go to mediation, I can invite the entire board to mediation with me. That would be an executive session. Or if we're talking about trade secrets, then that can be an executive session as well. Note up here, there is not a purpose for talking to the town's lawyer. So I don't get to hold an executive session just to give you all legal advice unless it meets one of those criteria. Okay? I can meet with you individually in office hours. So I was in town hall this afternoon for office hours. I can meet with a board or even two board members as long as it's not a quorum in office hours and discuss in confidential terms and give you legal advice there. But I can't have that discussion with the entire board. Questions on executive session?
Item 10 seems a little strange to me. But what is it about, so this is a public body as an energy supplier, so that would be the town as an energy supplier?
Yeah, so there are some towns that some towns, for instance, have a municipal light department. Yeah, so it's very specific to those. I can tell you I've never had an executive session for Purpose 10 in Acton.
So that's a business that the town runs, they might have trade secrets, so they would be justified in having.
Correct. Or they're, we're going over plans for security around a substation. Again, you don't want to have those discussions in a public session. Approval of minutes. Open session minutes have to be approved in a timely manner. And the AG has determined that means within 30 days or 3 regular meetings. I would just implore you all, again, we've had some bad practices in the past where we have boards and committees that will approve like 2 years of minutes in one meeting. Catch up and then don't do that again. Just approve them every meeting. Have it be part of your standard normal course. At some point, someone is going to ask for your minutes and they're not going to be satisfied when you say, oh, we haven't done the minutes from June yet. They're going to say, you haven't done the minutes from June yet, it's September. They are entitled to get the minutes under the open meeting law, not the public records law. They're entitled to get the minutes within 10 calendar days, even if they're still in draft form. So if someone asks you for your minutes from last night's meeting, you can't say, they're not final yet. They haven't been approved, we're not going to give them to you. You can say, I'll give them to you in 9 days, but you have 10 days in order to provide them a draft of those minutes. And they should be marked draft all over them in big letters, so no one gets confused that they're final. But you need to give, even those draft of minutes are public and available to the public upon request. They can also ask for the documents and exhibits that have been used during the meetings. If you know that there's going to be something that people are asking about all the time, for instance, lots of people want to see the select board, their minutes from meetings. As soon as they're approved, they go up on the website. So you should have a practice of your board and committee whenever your board or committee approves minutes, they should just go up on the website. It'll avoid having to deal with a lot of public records requests for things. If you know that everyone is really interested in the Kelly's Corner development plan, put the application in the documents that the applicant has provided online. Give them, so you can just tell people, go to this website, you can get all the material there. Executive session minutes. When you take executive session minutes, it doesn't mean that they're like forever secret and in a secret vault in town hall. It means that you periodically need to review them and disclose them as soon as the kind of purpose for the executive session is over. So for instance, if you went into executive session to negotiate a union contract and that collective bargaining agreement has been signed and approved by town meeting, then the purpose for the executive session is over, those become public. There's only a very finite amount or subject of discussions in executive sessions that will be kind of forever confidential. When you're talking about disclosing executive session minutes, usually, certainly the select board office and the town manager's office should be involved because they'll know whether or not town council's office should be involved. So for instance, if the zoning board has litigation and the case is settled, their executive session minutes then would become public. However, all the legal advice that I've given them in executive session, that still needs to remain confidential. So what we go through is we redact all the legal advice. And so the public would get, if they requested the executive session minutes, they would get a ream of documents that just had a bunch of blacked out things or some sections that are blacked out where town council was giving legal advice. So that is just a way of saying, you all don't need to make that determination. You can ask for town council to review those minutes. So Acton, unfortunately, has a lot of experience with the open meeting law complaint process. We went through a little period 2 or 3 years ago where we had upwards of 60 complaints in 1 year from one individual. This is my take on this. Very rarely have I ever seen someone complain about the open meeting law because they're really concerned about the open meeting law. Most people complain and file a complaint under the open meeting law because they're concerned about the issue underlying the open meeting law, right? The development that's going on. They're concerned about, the negotiation process with the superintendent. We think that should have been in public and not in private. It's the underlying matter that people care about. So typically, you'll know if this is a huge matter of public concern and your board has misstepped, someone is going to call you on it. The circumstance that we went through a couple of years ago, it was just very clear someone wanted to exact pain on the town to make a point. And that was successful. 60 open meeting law complaints is incredibly painful. My office had to be involved with all of them. And the taxpayers pay for my time out of the operating budget. So the complaint process is been made over the years much easier for the public to engage in. And for the most part, that is a good thing. There have been a couple of rogue actors that have really taken advantage and misused it. But you need to be aware of the complaint process because, again, it's easy for people to do. And if you're dealing with a matter that's high profile and contentious, people are going to be watching and waiting for you to mess up, right? So the complaint process is as follows. There's a complaint form with the town clerk's office. A person fills out the complaint form and they'll file it either with your board or committee and the town clerk's office. And usually the town clerk notifies our office right away. So I don't want to hear 10 days after the complaint's been filed that a complaint was filed against the HDC. I want to hear the day it happens because a clock starts ticking the second a complaint is filed. You have 14 business days. It's a hideous legislative drafting, whoever decided to do 14 business days, because it makes no sense to anybody. But it's 14 business days to respond. And that means that's when the public body has to respond. So within those 14 days, you need to review the complaint, have advice from town council, notice a meeting, and meet with your board. And what usually happens is a complaint will come to my office, we'll review it, we'll provide advice to the chair of, yes, this is a valid complaint. Whoops, you guys messed up. Here's what I think you should do. You held this in executive session, it should have been an open session. Renotice your agenda to have that discussion in open session and do it over again. And then you would have, at your next meeting, you would have an agenda item that says, discuss open meeting law complaint. And then the next agenda item would be, revote of matter discussed in executive session. So essentially, the first step is to have the public body police itself and get a do-over, right? So it gives you an opportunity to look back at what you've done, get advice from council. Did we do it right? Did we do it not right? Usually what I will do is I will also provide the chair talking points and my advice as far as whether or not I think the open meeting law has been violated. So you're not kind of off on your own trying to determine whether or not you've violated the open meeting law. I will be, or someone in my office will be guiding you through that. And then we draft a letter to the Attorney General saying we received this complaint. The board met within 14 business days. This is what we did about it. We believe that this resolves this complaint. Here you are, Attorney General. The Attorney General will respond by sending a letter to the complainant saying, I understand there's been a complaint. We've gotten the response from the town. If you want to appeal further, you have 90 days to do so. And then the Attorney General's clock starts ticking. So step 3, if they're not satisfied with, if the person has come to the board and we say we don't think there was a violation and they're not satisfied with that, they can take that appeal up to the Attorney General's office. Again, there's just a form they fill out. It's available online. It's fairly easy. Now, what happens if you guys are found to have violated the open meeting law? You are not fired, typically. You are not removed from office. You are not tarred and feathered. Typically what happens is you get a letter from the Attorney General's office telling you that you've messed up and what you need to do to comply, and usually requiring you to comply in the future, which of course you're already required to comply with the open meeting law, or attend training. Step 2 would be, if they've decided you've held an executive session for an improper purpose, they could say, we're going to make you release your minutes. Or if someone's complained that your minutes aren't specific enough, they could say, we're going to have you guys redo your minutes. So that usually is the type of violation and remedy that we're talking about on the enforcement level from the state. They could, in extreme circumstances, nullify the action taken or make you do it over. And then there's also, if they find that there's been an intentional violation, again, this is very clearly, intentional wrongdoing. Someone is, talking to all the board members beforehand in the hallway, making sure they're all going to vote the same way and there's video of that or something, then there could be that individual liability up to $1,000 per violation. And that is on the individual member. That is not on the board typically. Again, there's more detail here about an intentional violation, what that means. Very rarely have I ever seen an intentional violation. 9 times out of 10, 9.9 times out of 10, it's unintentional. So an intentional violation is an act or omission by a public body or a member that knowingly violates the open meeting law. So, for instance, if your minutes have been complained about by the same member of the public for years now, and they've sent an open meeting law complaint to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General has said, hey, HDC, you guys are writing terrible minutes, you gotta write them better, be more specific, redo them, and the HDC just never does it, then that repeated violation, eventually the Attorney General is gonna say, that's an intentional violation. You guys are just thumbing your nose at us now. But typically the first step is a warning, so I don't want you to worry too much about those extreme cases. One thing to clear up for both yourselves as well as members of the public is the Attorney General's office and the Division of Open Government and the open meeting law does not handle certain things such as unethical conduct. So I think Fran has a conflict of interest, so I'm going to write an open meeting law complaint against the Board of Selectmen. Nope, the ethical considerations are handled by the State Ethics Commission, and they're handled on an individual, not a board level. So the Division of Open Government and the open meeting law is not the right forum for ethical violations or allegations of ethical violations. Certain boards or committees hold public hearings. Those are those things that you need 14 days notice, and it needs to go in the newspaper at least twice, and you need to hear from the public. Typically, public hearings are governed under, all the time, public hearings are governed under other statutes. So if, for instance, you're in a zoning board hearing and someone says, well, I'm in a butter and I never got notice of this public hearing, that's not an open meeting law violation, that's a violation of the public hearing statute, which is different. Also, and this is kind of a big one these days, policing the truth of statements at meetings. We're in an environment where people have their own set of facts that they marshal, right? And so oftentimes people can get very exercised if they sit in the audience and they say, that person is lying. I think that person is lying. And that's a violation of, open government and open meeting law. No, it's not, whether or not they were lying or not. The Attorney General's office isn't going to police the truth of statements made during these public meetings. That's not anywhere in the open meeting law. So, again, I would just encourage you an ounce of prevention here. If there's a posting problem, postpone the meeting. If you don't have items listed on the notice, save it for later. If you notice members of your board emailing each other, I'd start with a gentle reminder, hey, I think this violates the open meeting law, guys, let's save it for the meeting. And if it becomes really problematic, I would ask the town manager to handle it, and then try to police yourselves when you're in executive sessions. And then just a quick reminder at the bottom, there's an AG certification. Within 2 weeks of qualifying for office, you usually are sworn in and you sign something that says, I have received open meeting law guide from the Attorney General's office. So if any of you were placed in office and have not been sworn in or signed anything, you should talk to the town clerk's office. Okay, that was open meeting law. We're gonna go through public records in record time. Anyone have questions on open meeting law? All right. Public records, I'm not going to go through this whole flow chart, but this is one of those that you should, if you are often responding to public records requests, this is something you're going to want to pull out from your packet and post up on your bulletin board at work. So this is just, you receive a public records request, there's an initial processing, and you need to respond within 10 days. Most of this flow chart should just now say, talk to the town clerk's office. So Leo, who is here, can help you with these things. He is our public records guru. We now, as of today, I learned, which is why these slides aren't updated, have public records software that manages public records requests. We are hoping that all of the public records requests will be funneled through that software portal. So this is all done electronically, and no longer are you just dealing with individual emails to your boards asking for application materials for this and that. You can now, when it gets rolled out, Leo will let you guys know where the portal is for public records. So you respond to someone, oh, so happy you're interested. You can request all these public records at the following link. And you just send them the link and they fill out the form. And that way the town can track how long it's been, if we have extensions, if the records have been provided. And then all of this stuff is managed through a software program and the town clerk's office. So if you're not aware and familiar with the software, talk to staff and become aware and familiar with the software. When thinking about disclosing public records, we're doing a balancing act, often like the open meeting law, where you're balancing, we want to be accountable and transparent, but there's also very serious privacy considerations, security and investigation concerns that we need to make sure we're withholding. So you should assume, there's a couple of things that I just want you to be aware of, even though you may or may not be kind of on the front lines of providing public records like the staff is. You should presume all records you handle and deal with in your public duties are public records. There is, the only exceptions are there's some exempt materials, and often those will be, they're set out in state law what those exemptions are. As a shorthand, you can just think of, geez, this is something that I would want being made public. If it's about someone's medical history, if it's extremely personal matter, no, you're not gonna want that publicly disclosed, so that's probably exempt. Your board and committee, and then attorney-client privilege communications are also exempt. Board and committee members are not going to be asked to determine what's exempt versus what's public. All you will be asked to do is, if the town clerk's office doesn't have the documents and your board or committee does, say someone's requested all the meeting minutes and application materials for the HDC's review of the Kelly's Corner development. I want the HDC to provide all of those documents, including any emails that they have or whatever, to Leo. And then Leo's office and town council's office will make the determinations of what's exempt and what's privileged. And we will determine, again, what's personally identifiable information. A lot of this material was set in here because the production of public records used to be more decentralized. So you would produce them from your own boards and committees. So you would really have to understand more about what was able to be exempt. But personally identifiable information is exempt. So if, for instance, the school committee is talking about an IEP for little Jimmy, we're going to make sure that those minutes are redacted such that no one can tell that the IEP we're talking about is for little Jimmy. If you have a public records request and you're trying to respond to it, again, hopefully once we have the system up and running, the public-facing system up and running, the most interaction that you should have as board and committee members are going to be providing folks with that link. For folks that are staff members, you're going to be more involved with gathering those documents and providing them to Leo. What I want to do is for the routine public records requests of, I want to see all the documents for 13 Main Street, fine. That's a typical request of the building file for 13 Main Street. I don't need to be involved in that. But for other requests that are larger and more comprehensive, you want to make sure that town council's office at least knows about it, so that if we're aware of, because Leo may not be aware that actually at 13 Main Street, I was involved in litigation for 2 years over that property. So I actually want to review those documents before Leo sends them out, because I know there's going to be a bunch of emails in there from me that I'm going to want to pull out.
There's usually a cost for getting these documents.
There can be, yes. So depending on the size and scope of the document request. So if someone's saying, I want the Board of Selectmen's meetings from last month, minutes from last month, fine. It's on the website. You guys go to that. We'll give you the link. No one's going to charge you for that. If they say, I want to see every email that John Mangiarotti sent in the last 2 years, that's a valid public records request. But that's going to take a staff member 3 or 4 weeks to go through. IT is going to pull them, and then you're going to have a staff member go through every single document and make sure there's nothing that's exempt or privileged in every single one of those emails. And so then we get to tell the person, okay, that's going to take a staff member 40 hours a week for 3 weeks to do at $25 an hour. I don't do math like that, but so if you want to pay $25,000 for these documents, we'll produce them. But if, and instead, what that usually forces us to do is engage in a communication with that member of the public and say, are you really looking for all its emails for 2 years? Or do you want to just see the emails about Kelly's Corner? Because then that takes it from this to this, right? Or how about just his emails in the last year and not the last 2 years? You engage into a conversation where you get them to narrow their request so that it's either, more manageable for staff and then not an extreme financial burden for the person who's trying to get public records. Anything to add on that one, Leo? So some things to think about as you all are creating records and maintaining records. Again, I'm going to go through these in a different order than I've listed up here. The commonly requested stuff, application materials, minutes, agendas, post those online. You don't need to provide them. If you get a big request, certainly involve IT staff or the town clerk's office. They know what to do. When it's talking about appointing and training RAOs, RAO is a records access officer. Leo is a records access officer for the town clerk's office. Are you also the records access officer for the whole town? Okay. So essentially any public records request, just talk to Leo in the town clerk's office. But the takeaways for you guys are 2 things that are important for folks to remember. Be intentional about the records you create. Okay. The official notes you take, the correspondence you have over email with constituents, the correspondence you have over email with other board members. Understand that any document you create that involves your public duties is a public record and is subject to disclosure. No longer is it the case that you can say, well, I used my personal work email, to communicate on this. So I hardly use my Acton shell email, so I don't need to look for emails in response to a public records request. The response is, nope, you need to review your personal work email if you've used it for Acton board or committee matters. Doesn't matter that it's your personal cell phone, doesn't matter that it's your personal email, doesn't matter that it's your work email or your personal laptop. If you're doing Town of Acton work, that document, wherever it is a public document. And that includes text messages as well. We have had requests, not in Acton, I don't think in Acton, I've had requests in other towns for all the text messages between all the members of the planning board. And they said, but those are my personal text messages. And it's, well, people sit in a planning board meeting and they see you texting, they assume you're texting each other. Half the time you are texting each other saying, can you believe this guy? Those are public records. And I'm gonna have to come to you and say, you have to give me your cell phone, or we're gonna have a forensic IT person go through it. And I hate doing that. So be judicious about the records you create.
So a record that you create is a public record no matter what? Or do we need to look at what is within your board's jurisdiction similar to the open meeting law?
That's a good question. Yeah, if it's, if you're interested in an HDC, oh yeah, sorry. So Alyssa is saying, as a public board member, any document you create, is it a public record, or does it have to be within your board or committee's jurisdiction, as is the case with the open meeting law? And that's a great question. Yes, if it involves your public duties, it is a public record. So if you, Alyssa, go to the Zoning Board of Appeals because your neighbor is proposing raising their house and putting in a triple decker with a pool in the back, that is available for rent all year long or something, and you're opposed to it, the notes you take or the materials you gather, the communications you have about this thing that is not coming before the selectmen and you're really opposed to because it's your neighbor's gorgeous house that's being demolished, that's not a public record just because you're a select board person. However, someone emails you and says, Alyssa, I'm really concerned about this. This guy down the street from me is knocking down their house and building a triple decker. I want the board to do something about it. And you have an exchange with that person. They're clearly communicating with you because you're a select board member. So that's within the scope of your duties. That's not a personal email anymore. Maybe someone wants to see, hey, was Alyssa working things behind the curtain to make sure this got denied? And is that appropriate? So I want to see all of her communications about this. So if someone is coming to you, or if you are going to another board or committee as a select board member, as a member of the HDC, then anything you take or email you or text you send about that topic is likely to be considered a public record. Just save everything for the meetings is the main takeaway from both the open meeting law and the public records law. Just save it for the meeting. All right, I lied to you, it's 8:25. Questions? Anything? You guys were great. Thanks. We're done. Go, go.